Ladies and gentlemen, if we could start the meeting. I haven't got a gavel, but I'd love to bang it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring this meeting to order now, so we can start, please. So this is a meeting of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just a quick brief I wish to read. The role of the Overview and Scrutiny is to provide independent, critical friend challenge and to work with the Council's executive and other public service providers for the benefit of the public. The committee considers submissions from a range of sources and reaches conclusions based on the weight of evidence, not on party political grounds. With that in mind, before we actually start, I just wish to bring your attention to another document that will pass around to you electronically. And if I just read the topics that are on that briefing note. So this is a briefing note on procedural issues at Overview and Scrutiny meetings. And the topics are substitutes, recorded vote, formulation of recommendations and the party whip, and that will be passed to you electronically. So, do we have any apologies?
Councillor Norman Jorgensen is joining on Teams, Chair.
Thank you. So, minutes of the previous meeting. Now we have 2 minutes to discuss, and that is the first one we will talk about is the 2nd of October. So that's page 5, item 40. Anybody, any issues with the minutes? Could I have a proposer for accepting the minutes? Thank you. And seconder, and those in favour? Thank you. On the next one. So the minutes of the meeting of the 9th of October, page 13. Has anybody any comments about the minutes? Have a proposer to accept the minutes? Thank you. And all those in favour? Thank you. That's right at the beginning, that's why. So first one was declaration of interest. Is there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Public question time. Any public questions?
No public questions and no member questions, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Item 40 is to discuss the medium-term financial plan. Or is it? Sorry, let's get myself in the right place. 18. Page 19, agenda item 54. I recollect, I just read the recommendations. So the outcome and the benefits to the community to deliver on the priorities within the council's corporate plan whilst maintaining a financial viable council. So the recommendations that are in front of us will be to note the unprecedented financial challenges faced nationally by local government and the subsequent impact on Wokingham Borough Council, together with the particular challenges for Wokingham. This is to recognise the imperative for responsible financial management and to consider the report, challenges, proposals, and identify further ideas to address the financial shortfall. So, Graham, could I invite you to introduce a summary of the report?
Yes, I think Councillor Imogen Shepherd-Wade will say a few words by way of introduction.
Okay, thank you. Imogen.
Hello. Yes, obviously this evening we're talking about the revenue capital budget for resources and assets and the chief executive, which is the first area that we're going to have a proper deep dive and a deep look at. What this report will illustrate is a lot of the work that the officers and the executive have done to try and improve our situation for next year, and you will see the changes that have been made. And I thoroughly expect you to challenge the changes and the things that are being done and not being done. And as you can see, it covers this area covers a lot of people. So we have a lot of officers and executive members here this evening because it's quite a broad area, but it's probably one of the simpler of the ones we're going to do. So yeah, let's do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Imogen. No, I'm deliberately not going to present slides up on screen. We all have the agenda there, either on our laptops or hard copy, because there's an awful lot to manage in terms of paperwork and doing business tonight. The most important thing is we give you the chance to understand, to maybe elicit new ideas, suggestions, and appreciate the challenges that are being faced. And as Imogen says, there's a whole array of councillors and officers around this table that have turned up tonight, and indeed Ian Shenton as well is here to help assist with the conversation and help us ultimately do the primary job we need to do, which is bridge the current sizable revenue gap presented at last meeting, 2nd of October, and the sizable capital gap. So we need to hold that very firmly in our minds. We have to set a balanced budget. And of course, in that process, we need to understand and we need to have the opportunity to contribute. Ultimately, we will at Council in February have to set a budget, both in terms of revenue and capital, that balances. So leading on to the pages, the slide deck in the agenda, starting at 21, I've reintroduced the strategic context. That hasn't changed at all, and the risks. The one thing I would add, and that's become evident through the revenue monitoring, is, as I said at last meeting, the pressures, particularly in our statutory services, adult social care and children's services, are not moving away from us. If anything, we are finding they are more present, they are more challenging as we face those increasing demands presented to us throughout the year, and we understand our both in-year and future year forecasting. Obviously, there will be a focused slot on adult social care and children's services later on in this cycle. But I think you will see, as evidenced through the revenue monitoring, the position, the pressures have got more severe as opposed to less severe. And it's the degree to which we can manage, mitigate, contain will be the degree to which they add to the position we have already presented. So moving on now onto the detail, what I'll first start with before we start moving around the various introductions attributed to each executive member, we had some questions and queries from last meeting that I just want to re-engage with, and some questions I received as well by email, and I thought it was only right and proper that they're all shared, they're asked and answered in front of all of you so that you all have the same information. There was a request made to show the savings that were put forward in year 2 of the last year's MTFP, and they have been incorporated in the schedules we have shown you. So you'll see what previously was year 2 that has now become year 1. So 24-25 this time last year versus where we are now in terms of the 24-25 proposal. So I hope you'll see that I think it was yourself, Councillor Dennis, requested to see what was the MTFP position when we started, and so and it was recognised that the savings had increased quite considerably. So you now have all that detail within each item showing what it was and now what it's become. And the key purpose, I think, in terms of putting forward that suggestion was to, at the time, recognise the significant work and achievement that had been undertaken since last year's MTFP. There was also a reminder that we should include the total budget against each item, and we have done that. If you look in the templates, it shows the existing budget, then it shows the financial impact of the proposal, and then it shows the revised budget. Sometimes it's not as easy to do as others, where it's a very clear activity with a base budget. It's quite easy to do, but much harder when it's a transformation initiative or speaks to a broad set of lines across the council's budget. So we've used our best endeavours to provide you with that context, but I don't suggest we've got it bang on in terms of what you would want to see every time. Chair, we're going to, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. It was a question I left you earlier, Graham, on your phone, just for my clarity. If you've got a negative figure in expenditure, what does that mean? If you've got a negative figure in income, what does that mean? And should total budget minus or plus, whatever the cumulative movement, be equal to the revised budget? Because I got a bit confused when I was reading some of these sheets.
Okay, can I pick that when we go to a specific template, because the rules of that equation changes whether it's a special item or whether it's a saving. So it's better if, so we can just pick that one. We will go to a particular template, I'm sure, so I can explain that particular template.
Yeah, that explains why it wasn't consistent through the pack, as far as I could see.
Ah, okay. Well, obviously it should be, and if you, when we get there, if you want to point that out, and I can clarify.
Okay, thank you.
I do accept with the enormity of the paperwork and getting them together quite quickly, because the work in the background creating the proposals, it is ongoing, and we have to kind of stop the music and then present the best we can. So I do accept some of the aesthetics may not be quite right, but I'll certainly clarify when we get there. On the other question asked was the one on inflation, and on page 26, I've provided the comparison of year 0 this year with 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully everyone's picked up the revised pages, the PowerPoint, which then expands that story. The front bit just introduces it. The second page corrects year 0 and shows that rather than 8931, it was actually 10931. And that was because of the late addition to the adult social care budgets following the local government finance settlement. So the 10931 is the figure you'll see in the MTFP, the CFO report. That is the figure. It was 8931 before we put that late addition in. So looking at the comparisons across the years, we have 10931 for this year, 11.2 million for 24-25, 9.9 million 25-26, and 7.9 million for 26-27. So there is a tailing off, but I think quite a cautionary and understandably cautionary year 1, and I'll explain why. So turning over the page, we then examine the 10931, and the question was, well, how's actual proceeded against that 10931? And if you break down each of those sizable contributions to the inflation pot, we estimate, although it hasn't been finally agreed, but the pay settlement, we think we might be about 500k light in terms of our budget provision. Adult social care, I did quote 10%, but it says the actual overall 8.5. I was using a more targeted assessment when I said adult social care was nearer 10%, but it was 8.5 compared with 6, which has put a 1.5 million pressure on adult social care. And then I've packaged the rest of the council's inflation together and compared budget against actual, showing it was about 611k light. So overall, my best estimate is that although a very sizable £10.9 million inflation was incorporated into our 23-24 figures as inflation, the actual figures that are presented themselves this year, based on our best forecasts, is 13.5 million, leaving us a 2.6 million pound challenge, and that's just inflation alone, ignoring any other demand pressures that I've referenced previously. So I hope that satisfactorily covers that off. Now I'll just move into a cover of questions received prior to the meeting, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. And thank you, Charles, for some of the questions you put forward, and I'll try to do them justice. First question was around the shoot end value versus the cost of refurbishing the potential new site. I say potential. Well, and I must stress that at this stage, the figures are very, let's say, desktop, should I say, for want of a better word. And for the obvious reason, until executive had agreed that approach, then we weren't able to engage agents and find out what a true value or a much truer market value might be. And the same will be true of the opportunity cost of the site referenced in Peach Place, otherwise known as that occupied previously by Marks and Spencer's. The difference in running costs, as you said, between, like I say, this cautionary desktop approach at this stage was about £200,000. However, shoot end figures do include an assumption of being able to rent out sizable parts of the building, which was flagged in the report as very, well, high risk, let's put it this way. I don't know if the words very high risk were used, but it was recognised that it was quite a challenge to do that. So I think we can, if we're assuming, say, a couple of 100,000 or that ballpark for rental income, then you add that to the 200 and you get closer to 400. But I would stress the ability to carve up this building and rent it out very successfully at very seductive rates is going to be very challenging. And obviously that will be all part of the consideration that will be presented back to future overviews and scrutiny committees that are having a special spotlight on these. So all I can say, in many ways, the gun has been fired for us to explore further, see what the opportunities are, both in terms of values from sites, opportunity costs foregone, and alternative ways of providing office accommodation. On the second question was one about the WBC Holdings provision of £6 million. And that's in the pack, just to assure you, that figure is similar to the Community Investment Fund, whereby a figure is approved as permission to spend, but it's only spent if there is a solid business case that's signed off by all those who are required to sign it off. In this case, WBC Holdings business case would have to be signed off by the company, the subsidiary, let's say, and indeed Holdings, in order to draw down that money. So I can't say what it's specifically for, but it's a permission in order to do something as it emerges as a viable proposition through the year. And as for Toutley, this is about the area marked in the executive report for residential and potentially for a care home. And we have gone out to the market to receive bids and interest for different permutations and combinations about the way this site could be used commercially. And therefore, the possibility of it being a care home remains on the table until we receive the detail that the market presents us, and then obviously share that with our councillor colleagues. The other question was how much is spent specifically on the care home. I would say that the way I would answer this question, because it's really difficult to disentangle a whole kind of master plan and attribute cost to particular places, but if we were not to proceed with a care home ever, then we would need to be writing off in the region of £300,000 to £350,000. So the lion's share of the work spent and attributed to the care home actually is site that we would show adds value to the overall master plan, and therefore would not be written off, would not need to be written off. And indeed, if we progress with a care home, whether it's at that site or at another site, a sizable part of that 350 could be reused because it's organisational intelligence that would be transferable between sites. The final question is on the commercial portfolio, what the £100,000 special item is. There's two items, special items, and they're both for broadly the same type of thing, which is the impact of the cost of living crisis, COVID, what have you, the economic position on our portfolio. And 100k relates more specifically to our commercial properties, most commercial properties, including town centre, and the 100k is attributable to the broader set of commercial properties that are indeed commercial properties, but weren't bought more recently under the Community Investment Fund. What I would say, so they're 100k each, so 200 in that whole of that suite, which I think is an extremely modest sum given the impact that the cost of living and economic crisis has had on councils' commercial holdings. So, and it's only there for a year to then review, but we're hoping that we're going to be able to pick up and recover to the previous levels we have in the budget. So I think that covers the questions presented. So as stated, everything that we have with these supplementary pages today, they're in the paper. So I think it'll be helpful if, when referring to questions, that we use the page number in the agenda rather than any others. So we're all working off the same script. And what in order to productively cover business, what we want to do is take each by exec member. I mean, there's so many different ways to cut this, but I think the most efficient, probably the most, the one that's most fair for each of the exec members is for them to be able to speak for 5 minutes about their proposal, obviously high level in the round, which will cover growth, savings, special items, capital in both resource and assets and in chief executives. And all the items in terms of the summary schedules has the executive member labelled against each. So if we'll obviously go to we'll do the process will be each member, one member talks for 5 minutes, and then we'll open to questions. Those questions will cover all of those items attributed to that exec member, and then we'll move on to the next exec member. And obviously you'll see we have 5 to cover, so we need to be quite targeted with our question and efficient in our answers. So I think that's all I'll say, other than obviously to remind ourselves the key job is to close the gap, our budget challenge, and just to also stress only new templates have been produced only where the bids have not previously been presented to ONS. So we've provided everything for your as complete as possible, oversight and information, but only new templates have been produced where they haven't previously been presented to this committee. And obviously that's where we would expect a lot of the focus to be on the large items and the new items, but that doesn't mean you can't focus elsewhere if you feel that would help you and indeed help us bridge our financial challenge. So I think if we can start with Councillor Stephen Conway.
Thanks very much, Graham, and thank you, committee, for inviting me to come along. My comments are going to be fairly brief. We know, I think all of us, about the severity of the financial challenge that the council, along with all other councils in the country, faces. We know also, in our case, that is compounded by the lowest level of core funding from central government of any unitary council per head of population in England. So we are in a particularly challenging situation. We do have some pluses in our favour. not least, as you've seen from Graham's very deft answering of the questions that were submitted to him in advance, we have an excellent finance team and a really experienced chief financial officer. And that is immensely valuable to us as we go through this budget setting process. I just reiterate a point that's been made already by both Imogen and Graham, that this is an early stage of the process. We've still got a lot of work to do. And some of the things you see in here are not yet in a state of fully digested being. So I'm going to highlight, if I may, just 3 items in my area. But of course, I'll do my best to answer any questions you've got on any other. One of them, I don't need to dwell on for very long because Graham touched on it himself. I was puzzled by R19 or RA R19 and RA R20, which are two items that you might want to have a quick look at. I don't know who it was that asked the question of Graham. I think it might have been Charles. We've got 2 items here. They're both special items. They're both for £100,000. They're both supported by very similar explanatory text. They, in fact, relate to 2 different aspects of the properties portfolio. The first one, R19, is for town centre regeneration, and R20 is the wider commercial portfolio, so essentially industrial. And the 2 could have been lumped together, as Graham suggested, as one, but I think purely for accountancy purposes, they're separated out because R19 is a continuation of a special item, where R20 is a new budget provision. Pauline, you wanted to ask something on this?
Yeah, I think it's probably a good time to get clarity on my original question. If you look at R19, you've got an expenditure of positive 100, which I take to be a reduction of an expenditure, i.e. Essentially a negative figure on the total budget. So the budget goes to from 1642 to 1542, which is what I'd expect. But if you look at R11, you've got a budget of 841 going to 656, and the expenditure is negative. So they're not consistent. I don't really mind which way around they are, but I don't understand why one's negative and one's positive.
Right, Pauline, is it okay if we question that when we get to R11? And
No, because it's a comparison.
No, I do appreciate what you're saying about the fact that as Graham said earlier, there is a difference because there's new templates and old templates. So if we're looking at some...
No, these are both old templates.
I think these are different categories. Yeah. I think R11 comes in, but it comes in savings, and I think...
Chairman, it might be helpful if I answer the question. Yes, first of all, starting on page 63, as Pauline said, as you would expect, something with a ongoing credit. So it's an income expectation of 1.6 million. We then say, well, 100k of it we're not going to achieve. So that's the growth, the special item, leaves us now with a new lower target of 1.5 million. And Pauline says that's how you'd expect it to be. So moving to R11, this is a saving. And the current budget is 841. The credit has erroneously been put under expenditure and not income. So if it was down one column, it would be spot on, which then reduces the overall revised current budget to 656. So it was simply that it went in as a minus expenditure as opposed to minus as income.
Yeah, I still want this on because that was just the first of the 3 I was going to highlight. And I thought it was going to be the easiest, but turned out to be a bit more complicated. One I do want to just draw your attention to is RAR3. Now, it's I suppose, a very clear symptom of the fact that we're having to look at everything and to see whether we can realise savings in any area, that this has come forward, because this would involve a complete policy change. It's not something that the council actually favoured when it last looked at this. There was a majority very clearly in favour of retaining elections by thirds. In purely financial terms, this would generate a saving, but not till year 3, you notice. And it's a relatively modest saving of 80,000. And we'll be coming to another item on this list about the pressures on democratic services, and making additional provision to cope with the upcoming all-out elections, with the prospect of course, police and crime commissioner elections at the same time, and also probably in that year, definitely in that year, 2 parliamentary elections, for one that Pauline has a special interest in, and one here in the rest of the borough that perhaps others of us have a special interest in. So those figures need to be seen in relation to the figures in this saving in year 3. All-out elections are obviously more expensive to run than elections by thirds in any given year. And of course, you do have to take account of the possibility of by-elections, so you have to keep your register up to date. You still have to do a lot of the work that you would do otherwise. And ultimately, the decision that council made on this issue was not a financial decision. It was a decision based on the belief of many of us that it was important to retain democratic accountability, and also the experience perhaps of the all-out elections that took place in other authorities in Berkshire this last May demonstrates that even 4-year election cycles don't necessarily produce stability. There were big lurches and massive changes in personnel. Here, we've tended to see change as a gradual thing, and therefore it's easier to handle a transition from one administration to another without a long period of uncertainty and rapid learning. So the decision on that will ultimately come later down this cycle, but I don't envisage this one appearing in the final budget papers. The one I finally want to talk about is a growth bid, and this actually relates to the Chief Executive Department, and it's CER5. This is a budget required to deliver sustainable organisational change. It's on page 39, I'm informed. The headline figure is,
It's page
but that's,
77.
I think it's 77 is the template. And the template actually spells out pretty clearly why this sum is being requested. It is important to note that it effectively, although it's a growth item, it effectively replaces special items that have been proposed in previous years to a much greater amount of money. Those special items have exceeded £1 million, I understand, and this has now been re-engineered down to under £500,000, but it is a growth item. But it's a growth item that represents investment to save, because this is all about delivering transformation across the council. And without this facility, we're not going to be in the position to make important savings across the board. So I would commend this to you as a really important example of investing to save. That's all I feel I need to say at this point, but obviously if there are any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Sorry, Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. Only, firstly, can I thank whoever spent the time on the new templates in the back? They're much, much clearer. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Needless to say, it wasn't me, Pauline. So.
On page 47, you say you've got an £80,000 saving on the move to a 4-yearly electoral cycle.
Sorry, the election, yeah.
Page 47, yeah.
It's if you look at the template, yes, it shows you that there's a year 3 saving potentially of 80,000.
So what I wanted to ask was why that's different from the saving that was reported, I recall, last year, which was 316,000 from memory, and from the Bracknell News, who reported it.
I think that included direct and indirect costs, and it included officer time and other things. But Graham would be probably better able to answer that than I am.
I think actually it might be that if you added up the difference, so remember this is per annum, so then if you compare 4 years of one every 4 years versus a schedule of one every year, then it's the difference between the two. So very roughly speaking, you'll save at least 3 years. It's not quite as simple as this, but it's 80k per annum. And if you added that up over a 4-year period, I know it doesn't come to exactly that. Well, it's closer. It's not far off, but it's not as simple as a calculation as that. But the point is, it's each year. So over a 4-year cycle, you'll have 4 worth of 80.
So the reason it only looks like 80,000 saving is because you only got 1 year of it.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, we actually have all out elections in year 1. So in a sense, we're going to see what the cost truly is, and it obviously exceeds the cost of an elections by thirds. And in this year, it's going to be particularly complex.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, on the same page 47, just I'm not sure it quite fits here, but yet again, we've been given the do nothing option as residents when it comes to filling in the electoral roll form. I mean, how accurate do we think it is when you're allowed to just ignore the form, say nothing's changed? But I mean, anyone could just, you haven't got to positively do something. Do we think that the electoral roll is accurate and also collecting council tax with discounts, etc.? Do we think are we going to have 1 year, we're going to actually have something where you have to positively say who is living in each house?
Questions that I anticipated that I must confess wasn't one of them. I can't speak about electoral services, to be quite honest, and about the compiling of the register. It has been the practice for some while that you don't need to register anything if nothing has changed from the previous year. I think that's the case. I'm looking around for anyone who knows anything about electoral services.
Electoral services update the electoral roll on an ongoing basis all the time. I mean, I believe you have to re-register for your postal vote. I think it's every 3 years. I could be right or wrong. But is that what you're asking?
Well, you can just do nothing, can't you? Because you just get sent a form that says if nothing's changed, do nothing. But if something has changed, you might do nothing anyway, because you haven't got to physically send anything back. Especially if it's going to cost you
that's
money.
it. Yes.
To return to the kind of financial aspects of this, obviously maintaining the register does involve resource. Whether people are changing things or not, it involves resource. And one of the things that complicates trying to get to a true comparison of costs between all out elections and elections by thirds is obviously there'll be a different pattern of elections. Not simply that you have one every 4 years, which is going to be more expensive than any one of those taking place by thirds, but you also almost certainly will have more by-elections, because if you've got a 4-year term, it's highly likely that somewhere along the way there will be some by-elections. Whereas if you have elections by thirds, it's more common for there not to be by-elections. So these are all just further complications that make really quite difficult looking at what the true costs of each system are.
Well, if the floor chart, Alistair, if we get a written answer from Electoral Services, are you happy with that?
Ultimately, this is not just a financial matter. It's a political one, and it's a decision about how much weight we attach to democratic accountability, as well as how much weight we attach to finding savings.
Yeah, clearly much better the politicians answer that one. What I would just stress is we follow national standard practice. So there's nothing untoward or we're outlier in any way of what we implement. We follow national guidance.
Charles.
Thank you. It's a question about the shoot end possible move, page 67. Obviously some big figures on here, and it was about the capital works figure, including feasibility and design fees of £5 million, which I'm assuming is the building work, the design work and the construction basically that goes into that solely. And what's IMT on the second line? And moving costs are obvious. Oh, cool. Thank you. Well, that's answered that one. I just wanted to get some clarity or a bit more detail on those figures, basically, and yeah, how safe we are on those figures, because obviously they're very significant.
Just say I knew the IMT one, but that was about as far as it went. So the 5 million, I'm pretty much aware is all in, but I'll let Sarah deconstruct the all in.
Yeah, thank you. So we have done what we would call stage 0 feasibility, and these figures are based on the move to, if we were to move to 28 to 38 Peach Street, Marks and Spencer. So we've used that as an example of the cost required. They have very initial design behind them. We haven't yet employed detailed structural engineers, mechanical engineers, etc. So they are a base case number on what we know about that building. We've owned it since 2017. We've got numerous surveys, etc. We've looked at lots of different opportunities for refurbishment conversion. So we've got a lot of base information. But the next stage of work that has been triggered by the executive decision was to allow us to do further feasibility work to refine those figures, and that will be reported back to the executive next time, along with the other options that we've looked at. So that is our best informed position at the moment, but there is a long way to go in terms of refining that figure.
Okay, so just for clarity, that's surveying building costs, converting that building, making it into a position where it's suitable for use.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Norman, you're online.
Yes, thank you. My question is, a couple of questions around RAR13, which is on page 57 of the pack. Again, it follows Pauline's question about the arithmetic. This figure of 1590, then expenditure 632, then the revised budget's 1590. Is that correct? Firstly, that first question, is that correct?
Yes, it suddenly dawned on me why it is so. And I'm sure Sarah was there to help me if I hadn't tweaked. But you'll see both in growth and in savings, there is a figure of 632. So that's why you start off with 1590, you add the expenditure of 632, but then you take off the savings elsewhere in the pack. So it's bringing all the growth and savings together, which gives you a net nil movement. So effectively, we, in simple language, we have an expenditure challenge, and we will rise to that challenge and reduce the budget by the same figure to bring it back in line to where it started.
I think the comparisons between RAR13 and RAR1.
Okay, that addressed me. Yeah, it's just looking at this one sheet on its own. It's bit confusing, but okay, I understand what you're saying. Could you run through a little bit more about what this item is about? I'm not entirely sure what is behind this particular item. Maybe if you just expand the explanation a little bit more, it would help me. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll start off. So in a way that I think it will be most easily understood, and then if Sarah, if you want to put a bit more detail on that. So over time, our capital program changes in its size, and indeed with significant schemes. For example, the town centre regeneration, when it was at its peak, it involved quite a lot of capital resource, and that capital, so staffing resource involved in the scheme, and we could legitimately charge those costs to capital. That's an example that you'll see right the way across the council's capital programme. And we also review our, let's say, how prudent and appropriate we are in terms of walking this tricky line between what's capital and what's revenue. And it's the culmination of the change in shape in the capital programme and us being a little bit more rigorous in terms of charging revenue to revenue and capital to capital. And it's understandable these things change over time. So the cumulative effect of all that is that we effectively had resource to the tune of 632k charged to capital that we can no longer continue to charge to capital, and therefore we must address that.
Okay, so what compels you to not charge that 632k to capital? Is it an accounting code or something?
It's both an accounting code and a shift in reality. The best I can give you is town centre regeneration is right at the end of its programme of works, and therefore has a lot less internal resource that we could charge to it legitimately as we could, say, 2 years ago when we were in the heart of the regeneration work.
I think it's Norman, if I just may quickly come in, I think it's as the capital programme gets smaller, necessarily there's less money available, capitalised staff costs. So therefore, we have to move this over to revenue.
Yeah, it's much more difficult when you've got a smaller programme. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Pauline.
Question following on from that, it's probably a crazy question because it's probably a good answer, but if you've got less capital work to do, why do you need the same amount of people? Why are you not downsizing in the people rather than just shifting the cost?
I think if you look at the RAR 13, you'll see this. The ambition is to ensure that we cover the costs of the growth item with savings within a review of commercial and property resources.
So I think the issue with these ones is probably that being split over 2 sheets isn't very helpful in terms of the understanding when you haven't been involved in it all the way through when it's been created. So yeah, thank you. So the answer is yes, you are.
Yeah, yes, I would say in the less transparent old days, we could have just deleted both templates, but I don't think that's very fair in both in terms of your understanding of the council's position and the challenges that we are as officers are enacting. But you're right, R1 and R13 need to be read in tandem, which leaves it as a net nil position. And you'll see there's one other area where we've shown both the expenditure and the credit side to show the pressure, but the work going on to absorb the pressure. And although it does create more explanation, more forms filled in and complexity in trying to whip them together, I do think it's the right thing to do in the spirit of transparency, both for yourselves and both the work that officers are having to do.
Yeah, thank you. I think just when you're reading it cold, it would have been helpful to have a little note that said, look at R1 before you get worried about why these figures don't balance.
The other one that Graham was referring to, just for completeness' sake, is R15 and R4 effectively need to be seen together.
Yeah.
Page 48 and R15, page 59, 48 and 59.
And I'll have to think about a better way of doing this, but I did put in bold on 45 is there is an associated growth bid that reflects.
That's how I found my way around it.
So I'll think of how I can make that even clearer.
It worked.
Thank you. David.
Just sort of summarising that for my own small brain, we've taken 632 grand out of capital. That capital money is no longer available to us, so therefore you're making savings in the revenue account to balance it. So it really hinges on how likely we are to deliver the revenue account savings. I notice on the RAG status that's amber. In terms of probability, does amber mean we'll find a way there, but we don't actually know what it is yet? Or does it mean we know the way there, but we may not achieve it?
I would start off with saying I take amber. So the budget is full of challenges all across the board. Some you'll see are red and they're quite big numbers. So it doesn't mean they're impossible, but the plans are far from clear. Amber is we feel more confident, but it's not easy.
Charles.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask about the WBC Holdings loan, which you explained earlier. If that's obviously money that may be needed, may be drawn down, those kind of things, will what is actually done be put in the public domain at some point? So how much is actually spent?
I think there is a 6-month report.
The wholly owned companies that that the council owns have to produce a report to us every 6 months that comes to the executive. I'm assuming it will be in there.
Yeah. But I mean, it's worth also saying, of course, that money is to be deployed if it's successfully bid for. Is to be deployed in giving us much needed affordable housing, but the council will get this money back effectively.
Thank you, Paul. Can I take this as the last question for this?
Yeah, it's a very quick question, same subject. I presume we're getting interest on it, are we? Or not?
Yes, similar to the Community Investment Fund, any borrowing is fully recovered for either the investment directly under the Community Investment, or if it's to the holding company, then the holding company will pay the interest and MRP as well.
The advantage on the holding companies is that they get access to cheaper loans if they come through us. I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yes, but we have to charge a markup to make
We have to charge the interest,
not fall foul of any competition rules.
Yeah.
So yes, not the MRP. They don't have to pay MRP, but a depreciation. Sorry, a loan repayment, which is equivalent to MRP, and interest is recovered from the companies on an annual basis.
Thank you. Considering there are 3 other people to talk, I think from Stephen's side of things, that would help us at that time. We'll press on to the next guinea pig. Thank you.
Councillor Sarah Coe.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight a few things. So obviously I've got bids in both resource and assets and the chief executive office. Across both of these areas within my portfolio, I've got no revenue growth across them. And the for the capital, particularly in the chief exec office, there's actually only one new capital bid that actually relates to the resource and assets portfolio as well. So I'd just like to highlight that officers have worked incredibly hard to not have these growth bids in there. It's a fantastic position to be in at this stage. Savings in the chief exec area are coming from a combination of efficiencies, rationalisation, renegotiation of contracts and moving to cheaper service providers. And there is one special item, which is actually a reduction on what was previously in the budget previously. So there's originally 300k in there for that special item. It's now down to 150k. But this is really integral. This is the digital services. This is integral to delivery of improvements to the customer experience. And we've already seen with the launch of the website what a difference that does make. So that's further work on the digitalisation of what we do, which helps us save money. So it's an investor save area, but it also, as I say, improves the customer experience as well, and frees up resource for people that don't have digital access to communicate with us in different ways. In terms of capital bids for resource and assets, these are investor save bids. I do note that possibly the name of the second one is a little bit confusing. So it's a bit late to change it for this, but we do need to, I think, sometimes name some of these a little bit better for clarification. But the first one obviously is for solar farm number 2. And the second one is to put solar PV canopies above 3 of the borough's park and ride sites. So not only would they be generating electricity for people to be able to charge their cars, but then we can also sell that energy into the grid. So in effect, mini solar farms. I don't think I need to say any more. I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Yeah, wanted to ask about RAC3, page 71, which is what you just were talking about, something I'm personally fully supportive of. It's the solar panels above car parks. Will this take away, how will this work? Is it on the deck? Is it in the air? I mean, will it take away capacity? Just a couple of sentences will be helpful so I understand it.
My understanding is these would be canopies above the bays, so the same number of parking spaces would be there, but they would provide those canopies.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. It was just a bit more information on that. Do you know the timeline of when it will all be launched and when we can start benefiting from them?
Yes, we've got the timescales here in the business case on page 71. So we have started with site feasibility. We are looking summer 2025 construction, but obviously there's a lot of processes that have got to go through. I would expect to see the business case come to executive before we go too much further, and obviously it would come back to executive after planning's been approved. But there's already been early contact made with distribution network operator, and it's looking really favourable on all 3 of those sites.
Morning.
Again, fully supportive of this. I'm just wondering why not Winner's Triangle? Is it too small?
The challenge with Winner's Triangle is it's not a ground park and ride, it's actually upper deck, and there are challenges from an engineering perspective of that. It is a possibility, but you wouldn't get very much energy generation for what you could feasibly do there. So it was decided we focus on the 3 more feasible park and ride sites.
Norman.
Thank you. A few questions around, excuse me, around the solar farm. With the solar farm that we're designing at the moment, do we now have a date for connection for that?
So when you say the solar farm we're designing at the moment,
the current one, rather than the second one, the first one.
Barkham. Yes, so we've got a provisional connection date. We're talking autumn 2026, first quarter 2027 is what we've had an agreement for with SSEN and National Grid.
Okay, and for a potential second one, are we in the queue yet, or do we have to
We've had
on your
informal.
accumulator?
We've had
Yeah.
informal discussions with SSEN who've given us some indications, but we haven't put the actual application in yet, and I wouldn't expect we would do that until the full business case has been to executive and more of the feasibility work done.
Okay, great. So these ones for park and rides are clearly, presumably, much smaller scale. So does that make it easier to get the grid connections? Is it more straightforward?
Potentially. I mean, there's obviously issues with connection up and down the country, and there's major reform coming, which we're going to see across the country anyway, because if we are to achieve our decarbonised grid by 2035, that's going to have to come about quite quickly. But these are smaller, so we can't generate as much electricity and put into the grid. At the same time, the returns on investment on them are much higher.
You potentially get money back more quickly.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah,
There's lots of caveats to this, and just to iterate, at the moment, you know, we're working on financial business cases at the moment. The full business case will come to executive. At the moment, we've got these here as sort of a statement of intent, and we'll start putting the work in to take this further, but it's looking highly likely. But it's got to go through a lot of gate reviews first.
Okay. I mean, it's again, just to repeat, but others have said, it seems like a good idea. The one drawback potentially is by putting this in, it locks in those sites. So you won't be able to change the use of those sites. If, for example, you know, if people suddenly stop using buses or everybody's using a different form of transport, who knows in 5-10 years' time or what's happened in the last 5 years. So it's just a little warning, I suppose, that by putting solar panels above these sites, then we tie them in for that use and they won't be available potentially for any other use. So just have to be a bit careful, I think.
No, I take that point on board. Thank you. I think when we look at the business cases in more detail, we can consider that as part of looking actually at the return on investment for that as well. And it might be that it is the most viable use of those sites anyway, whether they continue as park and rides. But we'll take that on board and can consider that as part of the business case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Sarah? Shall we move along?
Am I up next? Oh, excellent. Right, okay. From the beginning in this one. I mean, I've got, although my name's against a lot of things, obviously we can see on the revenue bid savings, contracts are doing very well. This going around reviewing our contract processes and the contracts we have and making lots of savings in that area. We've got some savings being made by automating things in finance and benefit realisation from commercial activity. So that we've been doing well on the savings front, let's just say. Growth, we've got our council tax support scheme, relief scheme. That's obviously the people on the lowest incomes in the borough don't pay council tax at the same rate as everybody else. So if you're on a low income, you pay a reduced council tax, and this is supporting those people. But we needed to increase the scheme to cover inflation and to make sure we're covering the same number of people that we have historically been covering. So that it required an extra £100,000 to cover the inflationary costs of that. So that's what that is there for. We also have the debt charges increased from investor savings schemes in adult social care and children's services. That's basically the interest payments from projects that have been impacted through adults and children's services, and they've come into this area here. Beyond that, moving on to throughout this, where I am next. I don't think I have anything else. No, I don't, just to remind myself. So yeah, mine is rather short, I suppose. Short and focused, yes.
Charles.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about page 33. There's 1.5 million in for contingency, year 1, year 2, year 3.
Page 33.
In the summary of the MTFP.
Oh yes, there I am. Central contingency, 1.5 million central contingency, year 1, year 2, year 3, and property maintenance and compliance. Do you want to talk about central contingency?
Yes, I'm
Sorry, Graham, just to explain, it's just a brief understanding would be helpful of how that figure's calculated, what it's for, how it's reviewed, etc. Just a brief summary to understand it.
Okay. I would be lying if I said there was a great science behind its calculation, because it's quite a convenient 1.5 million each year. Clearly 1.6 million would be too high and 1.4 million would be too low. But it's there as an overall provision for overruns on all of the capital programs. So we have to have a backstop if we run into problems or indeed have unforeseen health and safety works we have to undertake, and we don't have big sums of capital lying around. So this would be a very modest level of contingency given the size of our capital program, but that's what it's for. So I've tried to arrive at a number as small as possible, because clearly the bigger that contingency is, the more it detracts from resources available from other ambitions. But to go much lower would be
We have to have
quite risky.
Yeah.
I just, one more on that. You never spend all of the, well, it doesn't matter who's running the council. We never spend all the capital programme. I know that. So, you know, past experience tells you this is the right figure. I mean, how much have you put in previously? You know, we never get close to spending all of it.
Well, regardless of whether schemes are carried forward, which means we don't spend it, the capital programme still has to be funded. And so if something we agree to spend actually is spent in year 3, I can't set a capital programme that is on the basis that some of it might slip into future years, because that money will be needed then. So I would say, in my experience, overspends on capital programme and unforeseen, say, health and safety schemes arising, I think 1.5 million is the minimum I should be putting in the programme to be appropriately prudent.
David.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I noticed both R6 and R9 are RAG status red, because there's a risk that actually those savings might already have been made. And it's those two items account for something close to 600,000. How big a risk is it that actually isn't going to happen?
That's page 50.
So I beg your pardon, that's page 50. And then 53.
Yeah, so page 50 is the savings associated with contracts and commissioning. And the reason why that's been identified as RAG status is exactly that. But if I can explain more, we have significantly enhanced our capacity, know-how and interventions around contracts and commissioning. But a really good illustration were two things. One is sometimes some of those successes are made in capital rather than revenue, and the savings in revenue. So that causes a problem. It's only the amount to which you can capitalise that revenue under counting code that restricts you somewhat. And the other is that dreaded double count. Even if you didn't know at the time, all of a sudden demand has increased throughout the year, and we need that saving to cover off the demand, so we can't offer it up to go to a central target. I think the key principle of the work is absolutely right, and huge amounts have been delivered by that team working really well with the rest of the organisation. So it's, in terms of a programme of work and a focus, we absolutely need to keep on this. and I'd love to have more confidence in it, but it's as I talked about the impact of inflation 2.5. So how's that managed? Well, it's managed by making savings elsewhere in contracting, commissioning, and so that gets absorbed in covering the inflationary gap created, or budget gap created, as indeed demand would. So yeah, that one, and you talked about, so what page was the other one? 53 is obviously a modest addition, but the same is true. In addition to contracts, commissioning, commercialisation, it's been a real focus, and we need to keep doing all we can in this area, even though, let's say, we are giving ourselves an incredibly stiff challenge, maybe rightly, given the financial climate, given there's also savings requirements in across other directorates that one could call commercial or contracts.
Thanks, Graham. I think behind that question, and it's through everything that I've read on this evening's report, is that I'm quite interested in the composition between, rather than spending per directorate, the actual green, amber and red status across the piece, because to me that's painting a bigger picture of risk. So there's things we put in here that's green that are pretty much in the pocket, and I think that's fantastic. There's some red ones here that, in my old days, someone said it was the Department of Wishful Thinking. I'm sure that's being very unfair, but let's say it represents a significant challenge to deliver those savings, and to have some sort of overview of this spend just simply by green, amber and red will give us some sense of the challenge that we're all going to face to actually deliver the savings we require and what the risk attached to it is. Thanks,
David. That's a fantastic question, and I do my best to answer that in the CFO report. I don't attribute a single colour to it, but I try to explain the collective risk as well as safeguards that we have to present to council the safeness of the budget. I will say, we'll be able to say already, that CFO commentary will be recognising we face greater challenges, and therefore the ability to achieve the presented budget becomes that much harder.
Pauline.
Just a further question on R6. You've obviously built inflation into your contracts and commissioning costs for 24, 25. This is obviously backing out some of that inflation by making savings. What percentage is this of the total spend in that area? Talking about R6, page 50.
Well, I'll take the first bit because that's much easier than the second question. So the first question is, one could take that view. So you're saying on one hand we put inflation, and then we say, well, we're going to say we're going to do with even less inflation by putting this 500k in. That's not quite how it works in practice, because we distribute obviously pay on whatever pay is. And
sorry, don't take this as a criticism. I think you're absolutely right to do both. I wasn't complaining about it at all.
No, I wasn't taking it as a complaint. I was trying to explain the mechanism of it, so we, which is why it makes it harder. So let's say it would be easier in terms of this particular budget line if we just gave out 500k less and then passported the problem around the council, which of course then materialises everywhere else in the council. That's not what we do because of that reason. The second question, how much is 500k? 500k is actually a very, very small percentage of our overall commissioning spend, but our commissioning spend primarily in social care, for example, is facing pressures, as I indicated previously, of 8.5%. So it's trying to achieve a reduction in the context of everything's going extremely kind of higher cost, and those pressures are mounting.
So the reason I was asking was to get an idea of how achievable it was. So if it's 1%, I'd be a lot more relaxed than if it's 50%. I know it's not 50%, but roughly.
In terms of the enormity, the full extent of our contracts and commission budget, it will be in that 1% territory, maybe even less. However, that doesn't help if they're all going up by 8% or so.
Norman.
Okay, thank you. My question is on RAR7 on page 51. I'm just interested, Graham, that you're going to get yourself automated. What sort of opportunities are you going to be looking at there? I would have thought quite a lot of it is automated already. So what sorts of things are on the table for that item, please?
Well,
AR's taking over.
I'll try and answer this in a slightly less robotic way than I've introduced myself. It will be a whole host of things. It will be around those high volume transactional areas. So clearly, the administration, the collection of income, the payments of invoices. You're right. It has been an ongoing endeavour to be as automated as possible, but obviously over time, new processes, new technology, new opportunities present themselves, and of course it would be entirely remiss of me not to, in the finance transactional area in particular, to keep seeking cost reductions to help, obviously, the plight of the overall council.
Okay, thanks. I mean, one area that I hope we're going to continue with is the ability of people to pay their council tax and other bills by various methods. I know we've talked about this in the past, and I think it's a very small number, but some people still want to pay by cash, for example. So hopefully we're not going to automate entirely.
I certainly wouldn't support that, because obviously, as you say, there's people who have different skill levels with IT or not, as the case may be, and we are very much keen on supporting an inclusive society. And if people need to pay by different mechanisms, that's certainly fine by me, and I wouldn't support that ultimately. But as the world becomes more technically wired in, and even my 88-year-old mother uses WhatsApp to nag me and orders her groceries from Tesco's online, there's no reason why the council shouldn't have benefit from that, if that's what we're talking about. But I still agree that there still should be a simple way for people to pay in the way that you're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norman. Alistair.
Well, yeah, just following on for that, because you can't at the council-run Cantley Cafe, you can't pay with cash. So that's not very inclusive.
That I didn't know that, and I don't agree with it, as you say. So, but it's probably down to the people who are running it, and I understand that we are looking at alternative things there anyway. And I would hope that they would allow you to pay by cash if you have to.
Any more questions from the floor? So, Imogen, looks like that's your part over, and over to Ian.
Oh, good evening, Chair and members of the committee. I have relatively few items on the menu tonight. You'll be hearing rather more from me.
Sorry, Ian, can you put your camera on? Sorry.
I'll put my camera on. Is it not? Oh, hang on. Ooh, let's try that. No? What's happened?
We can see you now. We can see your hand now.
There we go. There we go. Do you want me to start again, or shall I just carry on from where I got to? Basically, I have relatively few items on the agenda tonight, but you'll be hearing rather more from me when we get to place and growth. The meat of the items tonight revolve around two issues that I would regard as legacy issues. Firstly, we have the boxing hub, BXG Fit, whatever you want to call it, and that stems from, if you look at the executive report in June 2021, it was very optimistic and probably the most optimistic business case that I've seen ever, and it's not being achieved. My screen is frozen. Is it? Can you actually?
We can see you fine, Ian.
Oh, okay. My screen is frozen. So I'm sorry. It would have required a membership level of around 500 people to deliver the 260,000 pounds per annum that was in the business case, and we're probably achieving about a quarter of that. The cost of running it, therefore, is quite significant impact on the council, and we are looking forward to the next few months when we have actually transferred the management of that to Places Leisure. That in turn should then yield a saving ultimately, because we will not have to be facing the cost of running it, but we will also potentially have a small, you'll see the saving on RAR 10, yeah, number 10, and there is a small associated growth item on a one-off basis. The second legacy issue, if you like, is the implementation of the direction of the leisure strategy dating from 21 to 25. The implementation of that really is moving towards a more health-driven sport and leisure agenda, with active well-being at the centre of that. And we are seeing basically that our SHINE programme in particular has not picked up post-COVID. The leisure centres on the whole, with the exception of St Crispin's, have picked up to pre-COVID levels. The SHINE programme has not. Not entirely clear why. It could well be that that particular age group, the over 55s, are more cautious now, or maybe they don't have the necessary confidence in their income levels at the moment. But we are looking at potentially there, well, we're recognising the realistic aspect that revenue levels are not where they should be, and so you will see a growth item for that. And secondly, there is potentially a saving long term associated with moving to the execution of that programme more towards Places Leisure. I wasn't going to say anything about Cantley Cafe, but as it's come up, basically there is a saving there because we are in an early engagement phase, market engagement phase, looking at commercial options for running the cafe.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions from the floor? You've got away with it. You saved the best till last.
I doubt I'll get away with it on the place of growth.
Oh, Rachel to go.
Okay,
thank you, Ian.
Chair.
Rachel.
Super, thank you very much. Mine's quite short and sweet. I think I've got 4 things. I have 2 sets of savings and 2 items which are planned expenditure, which are continuing into future years. So I'll take the savings first of all. CR3, the policy review, and CR4, which is looking at processes and service delivery. And I think everyone in this room will probably appreciate that because of the very nature of these items, I can only talk at a very high level at this stage because further dialogue is needed. Chris.
Sorry, Rachel, could you give us the page numbers, please? Thank you.
Page number CR3 is 75, CR4 is 76. If I talk about those first of all, and remind me if I don't give you the page numbers when I move on to the next items. So HR, as other departments within the council is always looking at how we can improve our service delivery, how we can introduce efficiencies, and we are also we have identified some benefits where we've got an opportunity to change some very outdated benefits, and in the process introduce benefits which are fairer across our employees. So I think those are the first two. Shall I pause there in case anybody's got any questions about those?
Any questions from the floor? No, thank you for you to continue. Thanks, Rachel.
Super. Okay. So the next two is CR7 and CR8. That is page number 79 and page number 80. These are items which are planned expenditure. We have the inclusion officer who's working on our Fighting Poverty programme, and also on some of the equalities and inclusion work. This is ongoing work, which is delivering some huge benefits, particularly to those of our residents who are living on the lowest incomes. And there are a number of items to be delivered, and so this is expenditure to allow that to continue. And the final item is about customer experience training. I mean, this is an absolutely fantastic piece of work, which is looking to really raise our game in how we serve our residents. This is an ongoing programme of training. It's moving out of the customer delivery team into HR, although as I understand it is the same person who will continue to deliver training in this area. And I don't know if there's any questions about that. Peter?
Just for 1 year?
Sorry, which one are we talking about?
Spoke about.
The customer experience training. So it's running already, and it's. Did you want to speak, Sally? Yeah. Okay, go.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So it's been running for a year already. We've had some really good take up across the council. What we're doing at the moment is looking at how we make it a more I guess a more effective training programme, and that's to make sure that we can condense it as much as we possibly can, because we've learnt through those initial individuals who have been through the programme. It's an additional funding for the first year, into the first year of the MTFP, with the plan that we'll be able to absorb it into our HR learning and development team by the second year, because we're doing a real push through 24-25 to get as many as our workforce through that programme as we possibly can. And now we've gone from what was an 8 to a 7 and now down to a 3 module. We feel it's much more effective for us to be able to do that, but we just need that real extra resource in the first year of the MTFP cycle, so we can do that kind of due diligence, understand what works, and then we normalise it for year 2 onwards.
Okay, Pauline.
Just another financial question. Why is the budget going down? Not that I've got a problem with it going down, just interested.
Well, is this for
sorry, page 79.
Sorry, say again.
Page 79. It's going from 1131 to 1023.
I think, but I'd need to double check that it's also taken into consideration the saving, the 75k saving as well.
It would have done. The intention arriving at the end budget position is to, as previously mentioned, is taking into account both the growth or special item and the savings presented in this pack. So if there was a saving elsewhere in this pack, it would take into account that as well.
If we're going to refresh this, it'd be useful to see where that's coming from, because it's going down by 107 grand, is it? Something like that? 108 grand?
Yeah, it will be taken into consideration the saving identified in CER4, as well as the change to CER. The other policies, CER3 as well. Thank you. But yeah, Paul, I can understand how we can make it clearer.
Are there any other questions? I think some officers have got off lately. Others haven't. But I must say, unless there are no other questions, sorry, Peter.
It's more of a headline question for Graham. You started this process with a 2.6 million deficit from the existing budget. How is that going to be dealt with in our new budget, or how does that work? I don't understand how you cover a deficit across, carry a deficit across.
The deficit shown in last ONS, shown as summary revenue position, showed us at £4.9 million, and obviously the job of the council is to arrive at a balanced budget, 0, and that can be achieved by increasing income, reducing expenditure, or using one-off resource, as in reserves.
Did that answer your question, or was it?
It did. I think that's the key to what we're trying to look at here. Is we're looking at the savings that are going to contribute to that figure.
Yeah. Yes, we're either looking for the savings to be higher or earlier, and expenditure to be lower or later. They're the kind of two key prisms.
Okay. It is a lot to take in. It's a lot to look at, understand, and I think the only real observation about presentation of it is that balancing of the two sides of the documents. We've got a deficit in one area and a savings in another, where they relate. So a reference in one page to another page to show where that came from makes it a little bit easier to look at. But apart from that, I don't see anything untoward about it. So I would like to put it to a vote to the chair, whether or not we put to the right summary, which I can't find. So the recommendation on page 19 was to note the unprecedented financial challenges, to recognise the imperative of responsible financial management, and to consider the report, challenge proposals, and identify further ideas to address the financial shortfall. So the only question I would ask the floor is, anybody got any ideas to help cover the shortfall, besides giving up everything that you ever get out of the council, free parking, etc.? Pauline?
It's probably a relatively small item, but there is an awful lot of member training, some of which isn't particularly focused on need, and I think we should have a look at that and just see whether that is all delivering real benefit. And this is not news to Graham, I've said this before. In fact, I gave him a list about a year ago.
David?
I'd be quite interested to know headline figures on the cost of meetings. We have 8 council meetings here, which I think is up from 6. They're fantastic interest of the 52 members present. I'm not sure. 54 members present, I beg your pardon. Yeah. Beyond that. And indeed, the cost of a meeting like tonight, we have a lot of officers at the time. And I'm not saying, clearly we hope these meetings add value, but it'd be quite useful. I think I'd like to know how much they cost in the round.
I think to some extent this is covered in one of the items. I'm trying to remember which one.
It's democratic services.
Democratic services growth item is really partly to cover the costs of the all-out elections and the Police and Crime Commissioner elections and the parliamentary elections, but it's also partly in recognition of the increased number of council meetings, the creation of a new overview and scrutiny committee in climate change or climate emergency. So these are all costs that we have to bear. We either have to bear them or we become a less accountable and less democratic organisation. And the one thing that does differentiate the council from a business, it is obviously in many ways like a business, but one thing that clearly differentiates it is we're an elected body, we're a democratic body and a representative body. So to my mind, making savings on our budgets by cutting the number of meetings, it may help us marginally. It would be pretty marginal to balance our budgets, but it will be at the cost of making us a much less accountable and democratic organisation. And in the end, I don't think that's a cost any of us would really want to pay, especially when we consider that financially it would make a pretty small contribution to a really big problem.
I think, can I come back on that? My question wasn't necessarily that we want to make a saving, because I mean, as I said, hopefully these meetings do have value. What I'd like to know is actually what the cost of them are. I think it helps concentrate our minds to make best value of them. But if we are having a meeting that costs, I don't know, £5,000, to know there's a cost to it means that we actually hopefully take it even more seriously than we do and get the best value from it.
I think you'll find that's in the budget under democratic services. They have their own budget lines for that. And but judging by our whole budget as a whole, they're really kind of small, that cost. But I'm sure that it's in Pauline's question about training. I mean, sure. I mean, if there's any training that you don't think we should be doing, then please raise it. And pardon? You've got a list, Graham. Yep, I've got a list. You know, I mean, if you think some training's irrelevant, then yeah, why are we doing it? I understand that, and maybe there should be a look at as to if councillors are not turning up to meet training, then why? But David's question, yes, I mean, it's all about democracy. For instance, I work full time. I can't come here during the day, so we have to have evening meetings and things like that. And if you want a representative council with a broad range of people, then we have to have meetings at basically largely in the evenings as well. But it's under the Democratic Services budget.
If I could, Sarah, answer.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a practical suggestion of, you know, given the number of meetings we have, if all members committed to using digital services and not having all these agendas printed, that would save a lot of money, actually.
I think contextually, if you look at RA R15, you can see the growth item related to democratic services. It's £50,000. And that is partially the additional workload expected as a result of the all-out elections and the other elections coming in 2024, and partly to take account of the fact we have an increased number of meetings. But, you know, that's a pretty small sum in the scale of things, £50,000, and that's covering both of those. So I don't think this is a major contributory cause of any financial difficulties, and I don't think this is a financial saving that will make a great deal of difference other than reduce our accountability and democratic status. So it's a good point, David, but I think for the reasons explained, I think it's probably not one where we're going to really be able to do very much.
Morning.
I'd just like to agree with Stephen. I think I think these meetings are useful. I mean, I've not been on scrutiny before. I've found them extremely useful, extremely enlightening. I think we've seen a few times where things haven't had proper scrutiny up front. They can easily blow up in your face and cost far more than they would do if you actually put a bit of scrutiny in advance. I'm quite happy to understand the cost of meetings. That's absolutely fine. But I do think democracy is important, visible democracy is important, proper scrutiny is important. And actually, just going back on to Sarah, I actually can't cope with some of these large documents electronically. And I mean, I'm an IT person, but I need a bit of paper. So not everybody's the same, I would say.
I may just very quickly come back on Pauline's point. I think the role of overview and scrutiny, not just in the budget setting process, but we've seen it illustrated very well in the case of the home to school transport review. We've seen it very well illustrated in the case of the proposed litter bin reductions. Overview and scrutiny has played a really constructive and positive role in helping us to get to better outcomes. And that's what it's all about. And I'm, as you know, a real fan of engagement with overview and scrutiny in a meaningful way, and for it to be allowed to play a constructive role. I would like to see much more emphasis on the overview part as well as the scrutiny part. So overview would be the development of policy, and that would involve members of all parties, all non-executive members, and giving them a meaningful role in the running of the council. It also, one of the things that has been a feature of recent council meetings is lots more questions coming in, written questions and ward questions. Now, to my mind, that's an invaluable part of what the council does. Every councillor is a representative for their area, and it's important they have the opportunity to ask questions that affect the people they represent and bring local issues right into the council chamber. So I think broadly speaking, we are trying very hard to make the democratic process work effectively. And I think we should all be proud of the role we're all individually playing in doing that.
Thank you, Stephen. Charles.
Thank you. Yes, you asked for constructive suggestions. I could return to a subject from earlier, the potential move from the Marks and Spencer to the Marks and Spencer's building from here. I note what the lady at the end said, that there was a paper coming to executive at some point with cost options on there. It just strikes me that there's £5 million in here for capital build construction costs, that you could buy an office building and work in for a lot less than that, is what my instinct. Yeah. What my instinct tells me, and I just ask that that's considered.
All I can say is that we are, and it's Sarah Morgan you're referring to, who's been doing a lot of excellent work on this, as have many other people. This is obviously a big decision, and we are reviewing the options. The decision made by the executive was to approve feasibility work to enable lots of different options to be pursued. And the option you've just mentioned, Charles, is one of those that we will be exploring.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, can I just also stick up for the paper agenda? Especially we've got a mixture of landscape, portraits. I mean, this is only 100 pages long, but the previous meeting we had a 600-page agenda. I mean, you can't read that online. And I mean, planning, we've had over 600 pages agendas as well. So, I mean, it's impossible to read those things on a PC.
Probably dive in before you dive in. Say too much black. The printing needs to not use so much ink. I think that's the main thing. I think that's one of yours as well, Peter. So, Peter, have you got a question?
I think this is probably an occupational fault with councillors. We're faced with a massive challenge, so we focus on where we can find an extra few pence saving here and there. We do need, I mean, Charles was thinking about a big figure, and we do need to be thinking about some big figures. I think that's really important. Yes, of course, the small savings can contribute, but ultimately, if we're going to overcome the challenges we've got to bite the bullet with some either big income generating or big savings or big ways of finding efficiencies.
I think what's pretty clear is we don't need this building anymore at this size. We've got to do something with it. The best way to make money out of it is we've got to look at and explore those options. But yeah, we don't need this building anymore.
Peter.
I know I asked this last year, and I'm just asking about this year. So I noticed in the budget there's money there for replacing 750 laptops at 450 quid. No, 450 laptops at £750 each, plus Microsoft licensing coming to 5 million. And I do notice there's a line item about looking at Windows as a service, but how are we progressing looking at, say, Chromebooks or looking at buoy stuff and whatever, so you don't have to have that expensive hardware?
Yes. Thank you. I'm in my comfort zone. So we are looking at Windows service. We're certainly piloting that through 24-25. Part of the challenges for us is that we've got to make sure that the product set work with the legacy applications that we've got. Within the public sector, only a small handful of vendors actually provide products into local government, and our ability to be able to go at pace is often has to match their pace at making sure that their products work with the very latest Microsoft technology. So that's one aspect for us, but we are starting the pilot. We're doing a lot of the prep work now, but the real kind of effort will start during 24-25. Looking at laptop, and part of that is to look at BYOD, so bring your own device as a concept for us. We're already doing it with a lot of our handsets, so we've started to encourage those people who don't need mobile phones for their day-to-day operational business of the council, that if they still want to have access to Microsoft Teams or Office 365, etc., on their personal devices like I do, then you can do that because we've got that secure position. So there's a lot of work ongoing looking at being able to replace devices. The other aspect for us is we've looked at extending. We used to replace hardware every kind of 3 to 4 years. One of the things we started to do is looking at if we can expand that out to 4 to 5 years. But we're also, because we're governed through the PSN, the public sector public services network, we have to keep the most recent version of software available, which does preclude us from being able to hold on for laptops that the private sector might actually hold on to for a longer period. So,
sorry, I'm just going to come back on that. With the purchasing of software going through to the vendors, do they not have the requirement to have a BUI interface? So that's become standard as opposed to some, I don't know what interface they're presenting you. So
I would say some and some. So it's a bit of a mixed economy for us at the moment. If you want a more detailed technical answer, I'll be very honest, then it'd be my head of IT who would respond on that one, Peter. But I can say that we work with our suppliers as best we possibly can to make sure that we've adopted the most modern technology.
Peter? I've asked a question about why they're using E5 licenses, and it's because of the security and the audit levels that comes with E5. If you use any of the lower level versions, it doesn't have the same level of security. It's obviously cheaper, but they need to have it auditable and the security features that come at that level, and Microsoft hold them to a barrel with it.
yeah, I get that. I'm fully aware of that, but I'm just looking at them. There has to be. Software companies make money by charging lots for licensing.
Lots of them.
Yes. And I know there's a lot of work ongoing on government in the cloud, because I work on that as well. So
our price product for Microsoft is set out by the Crown Commercial Services. So we adhere to those prices for us, and our license model is based on the security levels that we need to support for the councils.
Okay, thank you. Pauline, did you have something? Thank you.
It's just if we're looking for big things that we could potentially save money on. One of the things we still need to keep pushing on is failure demand. That is something that will save enormous amounts of money if we can actually resolve things first time rather than going round and round in circles, asking the same question over and over again. So anything that you can do to improve that so that it's clear that when somebody said something that everybody knows what the answer is and we don't end up going round and round in circles, I'm absolutely 100% behind.
I was going to say, I mean, you'll see that the customer experience strategy was adopted last Thursday and the year one action plan is already in play. And a big part of that is the digitalisation of services, the new website, the new CRM service. So this is an ongoing programme which Jackie's heading up, and that's what we're doing.
Well, if that gets delivered, I think somebody is owed a bottle of champagne.
Okay, I'd like to ask the committee if you would like to take a vote on noting this presentation. In favour? Thank you. And on behalf of the committee, I really would like to offer our thanks for a well presented and well researched presentation. There's a lot in here, and it hasn't gone unnoticed that it is an improvement from last year. I did see this last year and compared to this year, so this year has been a lot easier for me to get my head around. And to all the officers for turning up and putting a lot of effort in. Thank you, Graham. And the rest of the team, even if you didn't get a chance to speak, thank you for giving up on the cocoa and coming in. And that will draw us all to lunch. As apart from what I may say, thank you as well to the executives for being prepared to stand in front of us or sit in front of us and take the questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, finished. Got the writing.
So just have a quick an explanation because there is another item for St Crispin's. So it's going to explain what's going on with that one.
So the St Crispin's Leisure Centre consultation is going to executive on the 30th of November. So it is suggested that it comes to the next meeting of this committee for scrutiny on the 14th, if members are happy with that.
So if we just go through the work programme then with the addition of St Crispin's, are we really happy with the 14th of November? It's action tracker. Happy with the 28th with 102. And the 19th of December, the last one before we work a decent break. That is a big one.
Can I just say that we've got the Ghost of Callum still in the...
Yeah. Sorry, Norman.
Yeah. I was just wondering, for the 14th of November, which service area are we getting on the 14th of November?
14th of November?
Yeah.
So that's an additional item for St Crispin's.
Which?
No, for the medium term financial plan, which service area are we getting on the 14th of November?
Those bids, I don't know.
Do you know yet?
Confirm it.
Yeah. We'll confirm it, Norm. We'll get an answer for all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Bids. Yeah, so they're all those bids. So that would be just a one-liner for what each of the topics are going to be. Conditional through. '28th and the 19th also has got received details of proposed updated bids. So it's just understanding what those are. Then we go in. Sorry, Bonnie.
I'm a bit worried that the 19th isn't going to fit with the LPU in it plus the MTFP.
Yeah, it's a big.
Same, the 22nd of January and the 3rd of March.
Just on that one, I think a couple of those may move. So it's still early days, but that will be confirmed at next meeting.
Which ones do you think are going to move?
I think the local plan update is still waiting for some government announcements, so that may drift into the new year. And the council buildings one again, that's quite a big piece of work, so it will depend on when that's ready to come. But I'll keep you posted as we go through the next meetings.
I'm just wondering if we, I hate to say this about December, but whether we should agree another date just in case all of these turn up at once in December, because we're never going to cope with both of those. No, that's right.
So the only thing we could guarantee on doing is moving something we know is going to be available for the 19th to earlier to make space in case these other ones go. And then if we end up cancelling the 19th because we haven't got the work, then did I smile? So let's think.
So the 19th will go ahead because there's the budget item. I could liaise with the chair and vice chair and let members know about those other items as we move along, if that would, rather than putting a date in now.
These aren't, if these, sorry, my view is if the local plan and the WC buildings ones are likely to be delayed, there's nothing else to bring forward to an earlier presentation. So whatever happens, we're going to end up pushing something extra into January. So we'd have to look at the other activities that are going on in the diary and see if there's a space for us to put a meeting, put a marker in the diary somewhere to say there's another possible date that we might want to use. You want to push it out to February as well? February's empty. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll try and get some more firm dates when officers think those are coming forwards, and then maybe discuss at your next meeting.
But if we let the officers come up, see what they come up with, put some proposals in front of us for the next meeting for a decision. It's okay. Thank you. Which means March looks as if that might be a heavy one as well, with the police and fire services giving their update. That tends to roll on a little bit. Thanks.
Chair, I quite like to prioritise that planning service, to say that and keep that in there. Because things like the police and fire reviews do respond, but I don't know much we actually heard in fact, it seems like scrutinising the planning. We've never done that to my knowledge, and it's totally out of control.
Same applies to the highways and transport customer service in March.
Okay, so if you take a view on this, then that we have our immediate issues for the 19th of December. Get some dates come back for that to look at on the 20th of November to make a view on that. And in the meantime, in the background, if we ask the question, if it's okay with yourselves, I'll liaise with the officers and we'll talk about some of these other ones to get some reviews to say what can give, what can budge, and then we'll get them to offer us alternatives. Yeah. Okay. What was this one? Action tracker. What's outstanding? What's ongoing? Any comments on the action tracker? Go into yep.
And if the police operation of a critical plan or intelligence base is marked as ongoing, that must be coming up to an anniversary.
Yeah.
Sorry, David, could you use the microphone, please?
Apologies, Norman, sorry. Yeah, on the Combating Drugs Partnership, on the action tracker, the officers to ascertain if the police operation over Christmas was round or intelligence based. I don't know if you ever had an answer to that, but it must be coming up to its anniversary of being asked.
I will chase an answer and let members know.
So looking at that, it looks like it was planned to give us an update in March. But by which time we'd be asking a question about the one that's just happened. Was there one? Would there be one?
I'm blaming Callum for all these things, Chair.
Is that why his name's been left in all the elements? And
just that the the Active Travel Task and Finish group is meeting again soon, isn't it? So that is that's in the diary. Yes, it's in. We've got a date, I think. I believe.
Yes, it's been put in for the 10th of November. But I think Pauline can't attend, so I'll have to discuss with the officers and with Paul Fishwick. And it will be meeting for some time to come. Could I also mention the bins task and finish group, which was discussed previously, and I think we're looking into next year, but when you want to actually consider the composition and the terms of reference for that?
Yes. I think we need to sort the terms of reference out this side of Christmas, and then look for willing volunteers to start off with before we start pressing people in. And I do want to, although officers won't be involved in the task and finish group itself, I do want to identify key officers that are going to be available for the task and finish group to talk to. So personally, I'm going to, as a chairman, I'll go and ask those questions of who in the officer side will be associated with that. And I think I need to talk with the management committee. We need to consult with them as well about the task and finish group and the executive, just to make sure that the terms and references are clear and there's no ambiguity. It's not something we can decide on our own. So I definitely want to get the input from all parties. This Pauline.
I think whilst you're rushing around doing that, was all good stuff. The other thing we probably should understand is how the contract works, because there's no point in trying to find savings on something where there's no flexibility in the contract.
Yeah, quite agree. Because we have got to make sure that the task and finish isn't just about checking what WBC is contracted to do. It's what the other parties, the parish councils, etc., and also find out what's going on in some of these leasehold areas where they have activities going on. If they're letting their sides down, then we need to see whether we can bring some pressure on those to keep up. For argument's sake, my own leasehold area is they have to do a litter pick every 2 weeks, and it's taken quite a few letters to get people to go and do that. And unfortunately, the volunteers have been coming in to do it because it does look untidy. So there are other areas around that are suffering exactly the same from this. So there's an awful lot to be considered in here. So I'll start the ball rolling to find out which officers are going to be involved, get feedback and request feedback in from the executive and from the management committee as well to see what to do. And then if we put out, I would target the 28th of November. Definitely, I would target the 28th of November as being the date that we would like to have something in front of us to consider and to discuss.
Is it worthwhile the members here just dropping you an email to give ideas or thoughts of the terms of reference they'd like to see?
Yeah, so we will get assistance in formulating an email that makes sense and see if we can get a feedback. Yeah. Just want to say for myself, I will go and represent the committee's findings for the LTP4 on the 30th of November to the executive. Just to let you know that's going on. So if we're happy with the minutes that we've had, it will be based on the minutes from the meeting. Any other items that anybody wishes to discuss? Didn't do too bad. I really thought we were going to go for 4 hours when we started off. No, I still. Okay, is no one okay? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.